now believe that there are rogue planets, planets without suns that are simply wandering out there, and they would be dark because there's no sun to give them reflected light, and as a consequence they could sneak up on you, perhaps even sneak up on you, and also they may even have life on them. Now, how do these rogue planets get started? Well, if an object gets too close to Jupiter, for example, it'll be flung into outer space. We think that the orbits of Neptune and Uranus, for example, may have been altered because at one point, long time ago, they came too close to Jupiter. Now, if you get really close to Jupiter at the right angle, you could be flung into outer space. Now, why should we care? Because we once thought that to create life, you had to be very close to the mother sun. The mother sun would melt the ice, creating oceans. A mild temperate climate allows DNA to form in the oceans, and bingo, that's how life gets started. Well, if you have a rogue planet, it's cold because there is no mother sun, but there is another source of heat that we scientists neglected for hundreds of years. We now know that tidal forces in a dark universe with no sun is sufficient to melt the ice. Take a look at Europa orbiting around Jupiter. It's way out there. You don't get much sunlight in Jupiter. However, this moon of Jupiter called Europa, as it spins around Jupiter, gets squashed, differentially squashed, and this constant squashing due to gravity and tides creates friction. That friction creates heat. That heat heats up the center of Europa, and bingo. That's the furnace that heats up Europa, melting the ice, creating an ocean, a liquid ocean that we think is actually larger than the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean combined. And there you have it, a new source of energy to create liquid water far beyond the glow of a mother sun. And so we think that rogue planets could in fact carry life forms on them, especially if the moons of these rogue planets have experienced tidal forces sufficient to melt the ice.
Two giant asteroids are coming our way right now, speeding through space at 43,000 miles an hour, and one of them is about 2.5 miles wide. It's believed to be the asteroid responsible for the first ever recorded meteorite crash that almost killed a woman 60 years ago. So to talk more about this, I'm being joined now by legal and media analyst Lionel. Lionel, my friend, for this segment, though, I'm going to call you my meteor analyst. So, all right.
And the topics get meatier and meatier.
Well, let's keep our space talk from last week going.
Yeah, yes.
We seldom hear about these giant space rocks. How come, and how dangerous might they actually be to us?
Well, let's first of all look at the big picture here, the theme of this. From an eschatology point of view, the end of times. Think about this. This, theoretically, the asteroid, meteors, this huge collision, is what gave humankind its chance, our chance. So I find that fascinating. Number two, I don't believe anything the government says about anything. Now, number three, look at what's interesting about this. Let's assume that all of a sudden, and we talked about this last week, if all of a sudden people started looking elsewhere, where governments had to cooperate with other governments, where one government had to lend a hand, where all of a sudden these weird jurisdictional differences between us, this sense of nationalism, all gave way to this collective, we're all in this together, where kumbaya meets we are the world. This is a fascinating topic, because what it does is it reminds us just how vulnerable we are, how we're just this little blue dot in the middle of nothing.
That's true. That is a good point. And you know, as we discussed last week, I think a lot of people aren't aware that there are these joint coalitions that include countries like Chile and France and even some other NATO partners, but the U.S. is strangely left out. So I get why you may not believe anything that our government is telling us, especially when it comes from, regarding space stuff.
And what's also, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's also interesting, too, is that, we love to talk about space, but from a very infantile, a juvenescent point of view. I mean, here we are, Star Wars, and that's terrific. But when it comes to really understanding how this thing works, I mean, just think about this. Something that is 2 miles wide, colliding at enormous speeds. And when you also consider this part, who is responsible for this? Think about the legal implications. Who has jurisdiction? How do you make a claim? I mean, I'm sure somewhere in your insurance policy, we always have acts of nature, force majeure, acts of providence. I mean, these are, the implications of this are so fascinating. But what's interesting is that the first thing the mainstream media says is, don't worry about it. There's no chance it's going to hit us. Well, that's good news. But just think about this. When it comes to our ability to understand our position in the world, especially when it comes to space, it's hard to believe that we know less than we do this particular topic, because we have no idea of how this thing fits in. And let me also go back to the idea, especially every now and then we'll talk about evolution and creationism. Let me just remind folks, this is how humankind came about. And many people have suggested that, believe it or not, I'm really going to blow a lot of people's minds, that maybe our genesis came from microbial data, if you will, on these asteroids that hit us, millions of years ago.
Billions of years ago. Not to forget, this is what took out the dinosaurs. So, but according to NASA, the chances of being killed by some sort of meteorite or other things falling from space is actually about 1 in 250,000. Now, that's actually better than any state lottery. I don't care where you're at. But they also say that we can expect to see more asteroids passing Earth as in the coming years. They're just going to kind of scoot right by us. But should we actually be worried, though? How do you plan for this?
We don't get worried about stuff. We don't care about diet, health, politics, war. We don't care about cancer. Nothing bothers us. Nothing frightens us. Nothing. We will trivialize it. We will laugh about it. But what's also interesting is that one of these days, there's part of me that thinks, Manila, that the governments are kind of acclimating us towards some big news. And as we said last week, one of these days, mark my words, and I hope to be on with you, when that contact is made, when you go to some anchor who looks ashen and pallid and says, ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to believe this, but we have made contact. And it's not an asteroid, it's not a meteor, it's even bigger.
I hope you and I are definitely together. If and when that comes, you and me, Lionel, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
That was legal and media analyst Lionel.
Dá para vocês ver o sol de um lado e uma bola do outro lado. Tô tentando regular a câmera. Nossa, olha o tamanho da criança do lado do sol. Vou esperar ele subir mais um pouco para sair de trás do poste. Aí eu vou filmar de novo.